The entire top of the building just blew up.
The second explosion and another explosion. We have a report now of a fourth explosion at the Trade Center. There has just been a huge explosion. It almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see.
We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. Not clear now is why this explosion took place.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion,
but it was a huge explosion.
I saw the two buildings. I'm thinking it was a bomb because two of them.
This is actually, we believe, debris from one of the planes that hit one of the towers on the World Trade Center. The FBI is here, as you can see. They had roped this area off. They were taking photographs and securing this area just prior to that huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom. All the way down.
Big round of applause for Mr. Jeff King.
Okay. I studied physics at MIT. I did electrical engineering for about 8 years. I've had quite a bit of practical engineering experience. When I first saw the collapses, I was absolutely convinced that they were not spontaneous. One of the first things that I did was to speak with one of my patients, who is a retired Army Corps of Engineers fellow who's done a lot of demolition and construction. Showed him some of the public source videos that are available of it, and he immediately pointed out that there were squibs, which represent little puffs of smoke essentially coming out of the buildings initially, which were clearly a sign of controlled demolition. He had no opinions beyond that, but he said without doubt that it was controlled demolition. That sort of set me on the path of continuing to examine it and trying to gather as much evidence as I could. And the question I pose, what don't we know and why don't we know it, is sort of addressing the fact that at this point we still do not really have a meaningful explanation for what happened to the buildings. We have had several studies at this point, which I will go into, as to trying to determine a plausible scenario for the collapse. As of this point, none of them have presented us with anything that I think could be reasonably called a convincing and detailed account of why the collapse has occurred. And the question that's been addressed previously, the enormous destruction of physical evidence, as Chris was saying, the site was scrubbed very thoroughly. Out of the entire mass of the buildings that were destroyed, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, who are now doing the ongoing investigation, managed to save about 240 pieces out of the entire building. All of the rest of it was basically recycled. The obvious question is what does it mean that there was a controlled demolition? At the simplest level, it means that someone had a lot of access to the buildings over a long enough period of time to set this up. It implies, as many other things have tonight, that the people who had effective control of the site had an interest in having it scrubbed and making sure that no information was available, that a forensic reconstruction couldn't be done. Even in much smaller catastrophes, we typically will